Okay, here we go with our first set of notes from our Taxonomy and Plants unit. This one is going to focus on the taxonomy side. What is taxonomy and why is it important? And then later on we'll apply that taxonomy to plants, so learn about different groups of plants and learning a little bit more about plants. But that is still yet to come. So for now, let's talk a little bit about taxonomy and what the heck taxonomy is. Taxonomy is, just like my definition says here, is the science of grouping organisms based on similarities, mostly in morphology or the appearance of organisms. But now, more so, we look at evolutionary relationships. We look at some of really all that evidence that we looked at last unit and kind of figure out what that means as far as who's related to what and how they're similar or how they're different. This process was first done by Aristotle. Right, so we're talking about ancient Greece here. And he wanted to classify basically all life on the planet. Needless to say, he didn't, right? He's in ancient Greece, and they hadn't even discovered half the planet. And he really didn't even successfully do all of the Mediterranean. He was just really kind of using some general categories. For example, just trying to classify things as plants and animals was very difficult for him because they'd find some, organisms you'd think plant and animal would be pretty easy, but there were some things that had kind of plant-like qualities, like they were motionless, they were like rooted to rocks and things like that, but yet they also had animal-like qualities. And right when he thought he found like specific rules for naming an organism, he'd find exceptions to rules, like all fish spawn this time of year, but then this fish over here and this fish over here, they spawn in the winter instead. And so it was very hard for him. He obviously wasn't very successful, but for a long time, we were still trying to fit animals into his very, very broad groups. But then, as things got a little bit more advanced in the scientific realm, we started discovering more animals. We realized it was getting harder and harder and harder, and we needed a more specific system to make this happen. And this was done by Carolus Linnaeus, who's this guy right here in the middle. He developed what basically has become the modern system of classification with the different levels of varying complexity. And we, like I said, are basically still using the system he put in place today, and a lot of organisms, in fact many organisms, still have the scientific names that he gave them. So Linnaeus' system had the levels of classification that you've probably heard before: kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, and species. And we've added some since then to kind of suit our purposes a little bit more. So in the current level of classification, our current system of classification, the most general level is the domain. So here's domain right here. And as you can see here, this domain is eukarya, or all things that are eukaryotes. That's basically everything except for bacteria. So you've got plants and animals in here, so more plants, all different types of animals, but you also have things like fungi and insects and unicellular organisms, so pretty much everything. It's a very broad level. This is going to have the greatest number of species. And as we move down in levels of classification, we become more and more specific until we get to the species level, which is going to be just one, right? This is going to be the most specific level of classification. And with that species comes the scientific name, right? Most organisms have a common name, and they also have a scientific name. The problem is the common name is just that. It's very common, right? What could be a blue butterfly in the southwest of the United States might be something very different from the blue butterfly over in Turkey, and the common name just happens to be the same. But when you have a scientific name, there's only one organism that has that scientific name. So this is totally going to eliminate any confusion that might come with the common name. And basically, their scientific name is just made up of your genus and your species. So those two levels of classification. Genus is always capitalized, species is not. And when you're typing it, they should be in italics. Right? So for example, Ursus arctos is a grizzly bear, and Homo sapiens is us. So everything has a specific scientific name, and only one thing has that scientific name. Another advantage of the classification system is that all scientists use it, right? So it's very common. So this makes communication between scientists much, much easier, right? If something's a mammal for us, it's a mammal in France, it's a mammal in India, it's always a mammal. And it also helps you because you know something about an animal, right? If I told you something was a carnivore, or it was in order Carnivora, you would probably know something about it, right? You could probably tell me that it has sharp, pointy teeth because it's a meat eater. Or if I told you something's a mammal, you probably know that it has hair because all mammals have hair or fur. So even if you don't know anything exact about the animal or plant or whatever it is you're classifying, just based on what you know about other things that are classified with it, you can make some inferences, which helps a lot in the research area. So, and finally, the last thing we're going to talk about as far as the classification goes is just the levels of classification that I want you to know. Sometimes you look up an organism, you'll see other things like subphylum and subclass and suborder and lots of other orders stuck in there, but we're going to go with just these 8 levels of classification. And I'm going to go ahead and tell you right now that on your test, you're going to have a question that says, list in order from most general to most specific the 8 levels of taxonomic classification. Right? So domain, kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. In the easiest way I find to remember these is to come up with a mnemonic device, or, some funny saying where the first letter of each word is the same as the first letter of whatever it is you're trying to remember. So what I think you should probably try to do is come up with your own mnemonic device and write it down in your notes, because if you come up with something yourself, you're probably more apt to remember it. Plus you can make it funny if you want. That might help you remember it. But the one that I've used, actually I had to modify it a little bit once I learned about domains, is Dear King Philip came over for good soup. So the first letters match up: domain, kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species, to help me remember what they are in order. Because like I said, this is going to be a guaranteed test question. All right, so with that, we are done with our notes on taxonomy.